Welcome to CivilNet. My guest joining me via Skype from Melbourne, Australia is Assyrian historian Nicholas Aljeloo. Nicholas, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again.
We spoke to you a couple of months ago about the possibility of a church being built, an Assyrian church being built in Istanbul. Today we're going to be talking about something that has been developing in the Middle East. Last week, over 200 Assyrians from a number of Assyrian villages in northeastern Syria were abducted by the Islamic State. Just yesterday, the BBC reported about 20 of them were released. But before we talk about the release, talk to me, if you will, about the condition, the situation of the Assyrians today in the Middle East in the wake of this, of the rise of the Islamic State.
Unfortunately, the Assyrians in the Middle East today face an existential threat. They have been facing an existential threat since at least 2003. But, the Assyrians being a stateless ethnic group, so they don't have their own state, they don't have their own self-governing unit, means that they don't have the means to officially be able to defend themselves. Assyrians do not have any powerful allies, whether it be in the region or whether it be internationally. They are basically left to their own. And as a nation of that is largely Christian, in the midst of a sea of extremism which is being roused up by the so-called Islamic State, the Assyrians find themselves in a very precarious situation, be it both in Iraq and in Syria, where their villages constitute the front lines between the Kurds on one side and the so-called Islamic State on the other.
Right. The Assyrians are one of the oldest Christian nations in the Middle East. And as you said, being stateless certainly makes the communities that continue to exist in Syria and Iraq even more vulnerable. I read that some of your family members, sadly, were part of the attack against the Assyrians in Tel Khoran, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I mean, for you, aside from being an academic, somebody who studies this, it's very personal. How is the Assyrian diaspora today coming together, mobilizing to assist their brothers and sisters in the Middle East?
Of course we are, and we're trying to do everything that we can, be it from, trying to raise some sort of money to help clothe and feed the refugees that are now in Hasaka and in Qamishli, be it also to raise awareness as to what's happening. There have been numerous candlelight vigils, and there have been protests and demonstrations, in Russia, in France, in the United States, in various cities, in Sweden, in Germany. And so people are trying to raise the awareness of the general public as to what is happening to the Assyrians. You mentioned the personal dimension. Yes, I have been to Syria at least 5 times in between 2002 and 2010. I've stayed in the villages on the Khabur that were attacked. I have many, not just relatives, I have friends, acquaintances, personal links to that area. So you mentioned, the release of roughly 20, the exact number is 21 people from Tel Goran, thanks to the mediation of a very powerful Arab sheikh in Al-Hasaka. Now, 2 of the people or 3 of the people that were released were actually relatives of mine. And I managed to see at the bishopric of the Assyrian Church of the East where they'd actually reached safety. So, it really hit home when you see how tired these people are, how fatigued they are after their ordeal. It's just too sad to describe.
It certainly is. the Islamic State, the fact that they were able to escape or that they were released for, I think, an unspecified amount of money, a tax levied against non-Muslims. Is it a promising development that they were released as opposed to being killed, as sadly most are?
Well, obviously, we are happy that they were released alive, and that they weren't killed. We remember what happened 2 weeks ago, sadly, with the 21 Copts that had been abducted by ISIS in Libya, and their mass execution on the shores of the Mediterranean, which I think disgusted the whole world. Yes, we are happy that they've been let go alive, but the question now is, what is the next step for these people? And what about the other roughly 300 people that are still in the hands of ISIS? Now, at least one of the villages, there are 120 people from one of the villages, about 90 people from another of the villages. People from roughly 5 or 6 villages have been abducted by ISIS, and what ISIS is saying is that they will put these people on trial to see if any of them took up arms and fought against them, even if it wasn't self-defense. So if these people are found to be guilty by the Sharia court that ISIS has set up, or that the so-called Islamic State has set up, then they will be put to death. If not, then they will be released. That's what we've been told.
Right. I was reading a piece in Newsweek about a 4,000-strong militia being formed in Iraq, because there are also significant number of Assyrians in Iraq as well. And they are being trained to fight, and some of the fighters, both Kurdish and Assyrian, said that they will not go down without a fight, that they will fight to keep their villages, to keep their homes. What is your sense? I mean, will they be able to fight off the IS, who seems to have unlimited amount of resources and money and people rallying around them? Taking up arms against the IS, will that lead to more bloodshed? Or perhaps the more devastating question from all of this is there a place for Christian minorities today in the Middle East?
This is the big question that we all want answered, not by people such as ourselves, but by the international community and by the United Nations, and by the powerful governments that be in the world. Because at the end of the day, the Christian minorities in the Middle East are not the people deciding their own fate here, unfortunately. We really need to realize that if Christians do want to stay in the Middle East, there are certain steps that need to be taken. One of them would be to create a safe haven for them where they could govern and protect themselves. And I think if it is in the interest of the world community, then they should really try hard to work on that before, the world's most ancient Christian people is driven to the point of extinction. And the oldest language, one of the oldest languages in the world, the language of Christ, the Aramaic language itself, is also driven to extinction. We are living in apocalyptic times and a very scary period of world history, where we see, the Middle East, which was the cradle of Christianity from its very beginning, now looking like it's becoming the grave of Christianity, unfortunately.
Certainly is devastating. Nicholas, just as a final question, whether the international community is motivated, interested in protecting the Assyrians, whether there is a safe haven for them, perhaps in another geographic location, what is your sense? What has been the reaction from, power centers in the world? Or do you think that Assyrians will just become another victim of this horrific situation that we now see in the Middle East?
Assyrians have been victims, but we also need to stress that Assyrians have been survivors. Just like Armenians survived the genocide in 1915, also the Assyrians survived the genocide. Also the Assyrians survived massacres against them by the Iraqi government in 1933. The Assyrians that live in the Khabur River Valley are the descendants, the direct descendants of survivors of the 1915 genocide, as well as the 1933 massacres by the Iraqi government. We need to stress above all that they are not just victims, but they have been survivors and that they will survive. Whether it be in the Middle East or outside the Middle East, Assyrians really need to work hard to maintain their existence, to keep their language alive, and to make sure that they are not relegated to a footnote in history. I think that's one thing that we really need to stress, and we really need to stress that the world needs to wake up and realize that one of its most ancient and vibrant cultures is being lost to extremism and hate mongering. And I say on my part that, I live in Australia. I'm an Australian citizen. I have stressed a lot that Australia and other countries that were part of the coalition of the willing have a moral obligation to stand by the vulnerable ethnic groups and minorities that face extinction due to the situation brought about by the domino effect caused by the 2003 intervention in Iraq.
Right. Nicholas, a lot of the sentiments that you expressed sound so familiar as Armenians, and both Armenians and Assyrians do have a shared and common history. And certainly we do stand in solidarity with the Assyrian population today that is under threat of extinction, talking about the moral imperative, and oftentimes we are relegated to become, sadly, footnotes because political expediency always somehow overtakes the moral imperative that the international community should be undertaking. But thank you for talking to us about the situation. We will be following it here. We do have a relatively strong Assyrian community here in Armenia who do live comfortably and freely, and we will continue to, hopefully as Armenians who do have that kind of shared history with you, protect their rights as well here in the Republic of Armenia. Thank you for all that you do, and we will be talking with you again hopefully soon.
Shnorhagalem. Thank you. Merci.
Merci. I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest via Skype from Melbourne, Australia was Assyrian historian Nicholas Aljeloo. Stay with CivilNet.